She was standing at a podium in front of a room full of people when it happened. Her voice held for a moment, just long enough for those watching to think she might make it through. Then it broke. And in the silence that followed, something shifted. Not just in the room. In the way the world would understand Princess Beatrice from that day forward. What she said in that moment was not supposed to become a headline. It was not a press release. It was not a carefully managed statement approved by Palace Communications. It was a woman, publicly undone, speaking about her father in a way no senior royal had ever dared to speak before. And once the words were out, they could not be taken back. To understand why that moment mattered so much, you have to understand who Beatrice was before it happened. Because the image she had built for herself, carefully, quietly, over years, made the breaking of it all the more significant. She was born in 1988, the eldest daughter of Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, seventh in line to the throne at the time. By birth, she had a title, a legacy, and a set of expectations that would have crushed a less determined person. But from her earliest years, Beatrice seemed to be working towards something the royal family rarely produced. A version of herself that existed on her own terms. She did not follow the traditional royal path through elite boarding schools. She studied history at Goldsmiths, University of London. She interned at Sony Pictures. She moved to New York and went by Beatrice York, deliberately dropping the royal suffix, and built friendships in a city that mostly didn't know or care who her grandmother was. She worked in finance. She advocated for dyslexia awareness with a personal conviction that came from her own diagnosis, not from a PR brief. When she married property developer Edoardo Mapelli Mazzi during the pandemic in 2020, the ceremony was tiny. No cameras lining the streets. No global broadcast. A handful of photographs and a quiet announcement. She was, to the public who paid attention, something rare inside the House of Windsor. A royal who seemed to genuinely prefer substance over spectacle. But there was always one element of her life she could not control. One fault line running beneath everything she had built. His name was Prince Andrew. And in the summer of 2019, that fault line cracked open. Jeffrey Epstein was arrested in July of that year on federal charges of sex trafficking minors. The name meant nothing to most people at first. But to certain corridors of global power, the arrest sent a cold wave through rooms where conversations immediately turned to damage control. Because Epstein had kept company with the powerful, the wealthy, and the titled. And one of the names that kept surfacing repeatedly, unavoidably, was Prince Andrew, Duke of York. The first wave of coverage was brutal. But it was what came next that made it catastrophic. In November 2019, Prince Andrew sat down with the BBC for what his team believed would be a controlled opportunity to quiet the noise. Instead, it became one of the most spectacular miscalculations in the history of the royal family. He was flat. He was dismissive. He offered an alibi about not being able to sweat due to a medical condition, he said, as a reason to doubt one of Epstein's accusers. He expressed no empathy, no remorse, no visible understanding of what was being asked of him. The world did not give him the benefit of the doubt. It gave him something else entirely. Within 72 hours, he had stepped back from royal duties. Within days, the damage had spread far beyond his own reputation. Because Beatrice was due to be married. The announcement of her engagement had come just weeks before the interview aired. And now, as her father's name burned across every front page in the world, she found herself trying to hold two things at once: the happiness of a woman planning her wedding and the grief of a daughter watching her father collapse in real time. She said nothing publicly. She attended no press events. She gave no interviews. In the months that followed, she became a kind of controlled absence, present at select family moments, invisible everywhere else. Those closest to her described a woman trying to hold herself together with extraordinary precision. Every appearance was calculated. Every silence was deliberate. But silence, it turns out, has a shelf life. In January 2022, a U.S. federal judge rejected Prince Andrew's motion to dismiss a civil lawsuit brought by Virginia Giuffre, who alleged that Andrew had sexually abused her when she was 17 years old. The ruling was not a conviction. But in the court of public opinion, it functioned like one. The palace moved swiftly. Queen Elizabeth summoned her son to Windsor. He walked in carrying the military titles and royal patronages of a lifetime of service. He walked out without them. The announcement was made to the public before many in his own family had fully processed what had just happened. For Beatrice, this was not a news event. This was her father. The man who had walked with her through the park at Windsor when she was small. The man who had been, by all accounts, a devoted and affectionate parent throughout her childhood. Whatever failures existed between the public Prince Andrew and the private one, the relationship between father and daughter had remained real. And now, publicly and institutionally, he had been cut away. Something inside her was already fracturing. And then, quietly, it reached the surface. The moment came at a charity event connected to one of her causes, work she had chosen herself, causes she had championed long before they were useful to anyone's image. She was speaking. She was doing what she had trained herself to do: show up, speak with purpose, represent something meaningful. And then the words about her father came. Unscripted. Raw. And she broke. The room went still. What she said in that moment, and what later emerged from a private letter she had written to someone she trusted, painted a picture that the palace's polished silences had never allowed. She wrote about devastation, about carrying a name that had once felt like a gift and now felt like something other people used against her. She wrote that she had spent years defining herself through her own choices, her work, her advocacy, her deliberate separateness from the grandeur of the institution, only to find that one surname could unravel all of it in a moment she had nothing to do with. She wrote about the impossible position of loving her father while confronting what his choices had brought. About watching his face on screens and trying to reconcile it with the man she actually knew. About her daughter, born in 2021, still an infant, and the fear that by the time her child was old enough to understand her own name, it would already carry a meaning Beatrice had never chosen for it. She praised her sister Eugenie, who had publicly stood beside Andrew at events while the world watched with varying degrees of contempt. For Eugenie, loyalty was visible. For Beatrice, it was internal, and that had its own particular cost. Neither woman had created the situation. Both were living inside it every day. What made the letter so devastating to read was not any single sentence. It was the accumulation. The exhaustion of a woman who had done everything right, who had worked, kept her head down, protected her private life, built something real, and still found herself unable to escape the gravitational pull of a family scandal she could not fix and had not caused. The palace said nothing. The tabloids said everything. There were those who called it a betrayal, a royal daughter publicly processing grief about a father who was still alive, still fighting his legal battles, still maintaining his own innocence. There were others who saw it as the most honest thing a member of the royal family had said out loud in years. A woman acknowledging, without theater, that love and accountability can exist in the same breath. The truth is probably both things at once. Beatrice never stopped loving her father. The letter made that clear. But she also, for the first time, let the world see that loving him had come at a cost she had been paying quietly for years. The tears at that podium were not a breakdown. They were the visible edge of something that had been building for a very long time. And in a family that had elevated the art of the composed public face to something approaching religion, what she showed in that moment was, in its own way, a kind of courage. She did not get to choose who her father was. She did not get to choose the decisions he made, the company he kept, or the headlines that followed. She only got to choose how she carried it. And for years, she had carried it in silence. Some weights are simply too heavy for silence alone to hold. The question that remains, the one that no palace statement or tabloid reconstruction will ever fully answer, is what it costs a person to be born into a family where the institution always comes before the individual. Where the crown is protected even when the people wearing it are not. Beatrice grew up understanding that bargain in theory. She is living it now in practice. And somewhere between the woman she built herself to be and the family she was born into, she is still trying to find a version of both that she can live with. What does it mean when the place you come from and the person you become start pulling in different directions? That is not a royal question. That is a human one. And perhaps that is why her tears, when they finally came, landed the way they did. Not as scandal. Not as spectacle. But as something simply, unmistakably real. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below. And if you want more stories told this way, with the depth they deserve, subscribe. There is more to come.